My mother Helen always said family was everything, but the night she nearly killed me proved that what she really meant was that money was everything. I had been paying her $100,000 every single month for years. Money she did not earn, money she did not need, but she acted as if it was her natural right, as if being my mother gave her the authority to drain me dry. On the night of her 65th birthday party, I handed her the envelope with the monthly check, and before the applause from our relatives had even faded, she announced that I would also be giving her an additional $1 million immediately so she could finally live the retirement she deserved. She said it loudly into the microphone, smiling as if the decision had already been made, as if my role in the story was to nod and look grateful for the chance to serve her. The entire banquet hall broke into applause, champagne glasses clinking, cousins cheering, my older brother Peter grinning from ear to ear because he knew he would get his share of the spoils. But I did not nod. I did not smile. I stood up, my legs trembling, but my voice clear, and I said no. The applause faltered. A murmur rolled across the room. Helen's painted lips twisted, her eyes narrowing into slits of rage. For a heartbeat, she tried to pretend it was a joke, asking me sweetly to stop teasing your dear old mother. But when I refused again, her mask shattered. She grabbed the heavy crystal vase from the centerpiece of the head table, and with a scream that cut through the silence, she swung it at me with all the strength of her wiry arms. The blow connected with the side of my skull, exploding stars in my vision, glass-shattering blood pouring down my face. I stumbled backward, hands clutching at nothing, the floor rushing up to meet me. The room erupted in chaos. Guests screamed, chairs crashed, phones were raised, the red glow of live stream screens illuminating horrified faces. And through it all, my brother Peter stood still, his arms folded, a smirk twisting his mouth. He did not step in. He did not shield me. He muttered loud enough for those around him to hear. She should have just given Mom the money. Another wave of pain crashed over me, sharper than the vase, sharper than the blood dripping down my neck. The realization that I was utterly alone, abandoned by the very people who should have protected me. As I lay on the cold marble floor, vision blurring, I felt shoes stepping back from me rather than toward me. No one wanted to interfere with Helen. No one dared cross her. They had watched her dominate this family for decades, and they had chosen silence every time. The betrayal tasted like iron in my mouth. Sirens wailed in the distance as someone finally called an ambulance. My body trembled uncontrollably, the lights above me fracturing into 1,000 painful shards. Somewhere above, Helen wailed theatrically. "Look what she made me do! Look how ungrateful she is!" And people nodded. People whispered, people recorded, even bleeding, even half-conscious. I knew she was already spinning the story, painting herself as the victim, turning my defiance into proof of my supposed cruelty. In that moment, I realized the truth I had been denying for years to her. I was not a daughter. I was a bank account with legs. I was a resource to be drained until there was nothing left. I was nothing more than a vessel for her greed. And Peter was her accomplice, the loyal son who reaped the benefits of my work while sneering at my pain. The stretcher wheels rattled as paramedics lifted me from the ground. My ears rang, my chest burned, and yet beneath the haze of pain, a single thought crystallized with more clarity than anything I had ever known: this would not end here. And this assault, this humiliation, this attempted theft of my life and my dignity would not vanish into whispers. I would not allow them to rewrite what had just happened. They had beaten my body, but in doing so they had given me the weapon they never wanted me to have: undeniable evidence. Dozens of live streams, dozens of witnesses, the truth carved into pixels and memory. Lying on that stretcher, blood soaking the sheets, I swore to myself that I would not be silent. I would not be their victim. I would take everything they had tried to use against me and turn it into their downfall. My mother thought she could control me with guilt, with violence, with blood. She was wrong. This was not the end of the story. This was the beginning of my revenge. If you are listening right now, I want you to pause and think about something very carefully. Have you ever been beaten nearly to death by the very person who was supposed to love you unconditionally, not because you did anything wrong, but because you refused to hand over money? That is my story. My name is Monica Graves. I am 42 years old, and I have spent my entire adult life trying to prove that blood is stronger than betrayal. For years, I gave my mother everything she asked for $100,000 every single month, believing it would buy peace, believing it would finally make her see me as a daughter instead of a bank account. But the night she demanded $1 million more, the night I refused, she shattered that illusion with a crystal vase and left me bleeding on the floor while my brother laughed. I am sharing this story not because I want pity, but because I know I am not the only one. Too many people remain silent under the weight of toxic families under the lie that abuse is excusable if it comes from someone related to you by blood. So I am asking you now if you believe dignity matters more than blind loyalty-type justice in the comments. And tell me where you are watching from, because I want to know how far this message travels. Together, we can expose the truth that family does not mean ownership, it means respect. My name is Monica Graves. I am 42 years old, and if you look at my life on paper, you would think I was living a dream. I built a technology company from scratch, worked 16-hour days through my 20s and 30s, and turned late nights of code and coffee into a multi-million-dollar startup that eventually caught the attention of investors from Silicon Valley. When I sold a portion of my shares, I had more money in my account than my entire family had ever seen in 3 generations. I bought a house in Dallas with floor-to-ceiling windows, a car that ran smoothly without the constant rattle of repair, and I finally exhaled after years of grinding. But even as I built a world where I could breathe, I never escaped the shadow of my family. My mother Helen had always been a woman who wrapped her control in the language of love. To neighbors, she was generous, the widow who sacrificed for her children. To me, she was a master of guilt. A voice that reminded me daily that everything I did was never enough, that my success belonged to her because she gave me life. When I began sending her money, first a few thousand a month, then more as my company grew, she praised me for being responsible. Soon, it was not praise, but expectation. $100,000 each month. It became routine, like a second mortgage, except this mortgage was my mother. And if I ever hesitated, she reminded me of family duty. My brother Peter made sure to echo her chorus. At 45, he still lived off her and off me, moving from one failed job to another, always arriving at family gatherings with a new excuse. He called me the golden goose, not in admiration, but in entitlement. I was useful only as long as I produced. At every dinner, every holiday, I was cast as the successful sister who owed her family for her good fortune. It was never framed as generosity, never kindness, always duty. The more I gave, the less they respected me. I can still hear Helen's voice on the phone late at night after I had wired her money. "You are doing the right thing, Monica. Remember family first." If I ever mentioned how hard I was working, she brushed it aside. If I told her about an award my company won, she said, "That is nice, but Peter is having a rough week. Can you send extra?" Nothing was ever enough. Yet a part of me hoped that if I kept giving, if I kept proving my love in dollars one day, she would look at me with pride instead of calculation. That hope was my biggest mistake. The truth is, Helen never wanted me to succeed for myself. She wanted me to succeed for her to funnel every achievement into her hands, to hold it up as evidence that she had raised a dutiful daughter. And Peter was her silent partner, her echo chamber, the one who clapped when she demanded more, who sneered when I dared to hesitate. To them, my independence was a threat. My money was not mine. It was theirs by default, and if I resisted, they reminded me of my place. In public, they bragged about me as their successful daughter, but behind closed doors, they chipped away at me, cutting until I believed I was selfish for even wanting to breathe on my own. That was the family I carried into adulthood. That was the weight I bore on my shoulders the night Helen raised the vase and decided her daughter's blood was less valuable than her daughter's bank account. When I think back to my childhood, the images that come first are not birthday parties or warm embraces, but comparisons constant and sharp like stones thrown in my direction. My mother Helen adored my brother Peter from the moment he was born. She called him her miracle, her pride, her little man. To me, she offered something different, a lifetime of reminders that I would never measure up. I was the difficult one, the stubborn girl who asked too many questions, who read books when other girls played dress-up, who preferred sketching designs in notebooks to gossiping with cousins. When I earned good grades, she said it was because teachers took pity on me. When Peter scraped by with barely passing marks, she said it was because boys were meant for bigger things than school. At family gatherings, relatives cooed over Peter's jokes, calling him charming while they told me to smile more, to stop being so serious, to remember that no man would want me if I kept acting smarter than everyone else. I learned early that my mind, the very thing that kept me alive, was treated as a flaw. Helen's favorite phrase was family first, but what she meant was Peter first. When money was tight, she gave him new shoes while I wore hand-me-downs. When he wanted to join a sports team, she found the money. When I wanted to attend a summer science program, she said we could not afford such nonsense. Every choice sent the same message: my needs were optional, his were mandatory. Over time, those choices carved deep grooves in my spirit. Gaslighting became her weapon. If I cried, she said I was dramatic. If I resisted, she said I was cruel. If I succeeded, she said I was lucky. Nothing belonged to me, not even my feelings. By the time I was a teenager, I had trained myself to swallow anger until it burned my throat. I remember one night when I was 15 studying late at the kitchen table. I had just won a state science fair award, the kind of thing that could open doors to scholarships. I placed the ribbon on the table, hoping for recognition. Helen glanced at it, then turned to Peter, who was complaining about a coach. She spent an hour consoling him, never once mentioning my award. When I finally asked why she did not congratulate me, she sighed. "Monica, must everything always be about you?" Those words sank into me like poison. They taught me that wanting acknowledgement was selfish. They trained me to doubt my own worth. This was the soil where my adult choices grew, the reason why when I started earning money, I gave it away without hesitation, thinking maybe this time she would see me. Gaslighting twisted my victories into burdens. If I bought myself something nice, she said I was flaunting. If I saved money, she said I was greedy. If I offered to pay for Peter's mistakes, she said it was proof I finally understood family. I was trapped in a maze where every path led back to her control. Looking back now, I can see how deliberate it was, how carefully she wove the net around me. She convinced me that love was conditional, that boundaries were cruelty, that survival meant compliance. And Peter learned the same lesson, but from the other side, that he was entitled to take, that he was the chosen one, that I was the one who owed. It is easy for outsiders to say, "Why didn't you just walk away?" But when you are raised to believe your value comes from sacrifice, leaving feels like betrayal. And betrayal in Helen's world was unforgivable. That is the childhood I carried into adulthood, the training that made me vulnerable when the demands grew larger, when 100,000 a month became not a gift, but an expectation, when even that became not enough. Adulthood was supposed to be my escape. I left home at 18 with 2 suitcases, a scholarship, and a fire in my chest that told me if I worked hard enough I could build a life free from Helen's grip. College was brutal. I worked 2 part-time jobs while studying computer science, sleeping 4 hours a night, living on vending machine coffee. But for the first time, the voices around me believed in me. Professors praised my code. Classmates asked me to lead projects. Mentors told me I was destined for more than survival. That validation became oxygen. After graduation, I took a job at a startup in Austin, working 16-hour days, sometimes sleeping at my desk. While my friends dated, married, and traveled, I poured myself into building something that would last. By my early 30s, I had launched my own company. At first, it was small. Just me and 2 friends coding in a cramped apartment, but within 5 years, investors were calling, articles were being written, and suddenly, I was the face of a rising tech firm. When I sold a portion of the company for millions, I thought I had finally broken free. I bought my house, my car, the stability I had dreamed of since childhood. But freedom, it turned out, was an illusion. Helen and Peter never celebrated my success for what it was. They saw it as theirs by default. The first time I offered to help with bills, Helen cried on the phone about how proud she was. But soon, it was no longer gratitude, it was expectation. If I gave 10,000, she asked for 20. If I gave 20, she asked for 50. And when I started sending 100,000 each month, she said it was only fair since I had so much. Peter chimed in too, treating my deposits like his paycheck. He bought cars he could not maintain, invested in doomed schemes, knowing that when everything collapsed, he could call me. If I hesitated, Helen reminded me of family duty. She told me that providing for her was proof that I was not selfish, proof that I had finally grown into a good daughter. When I tried to explain the pressure of running a company, the exhaustion of constant travel, she dismissed it. You should be grateful, Monica. Not everyone gets to live like you. Gratitude in her vocabulary meant obedience. My achievements were invisible. What mattered was how much of them I handed over. Friends congratulated me on success, but behind closed doors, I was drowning. I wired money every month like clockwork, convincing myself it was the price of peace. But peace never came. The more I gave, the more they demanded. At family gatherings, Helen bragged about her generous daughter, but in private, she told me it was not generosity, it was obligation. Peter mocked me openly, calling me the golden goose, as if my only purpose was to keep laying checks for them to spend. I remember once when I tried to say no when I told Helen that 100,000 was already too much. She fell silent on the phone, then whispered, "After all I sacrificed for you, is this how you repay me?" The guilt sliced through me like a knife, and before the call ended, I had already wired the money. That was the cycle demand resistance guilt compliance. I told myself it was easier to pay than to fight. But inside me, resentment grew like a storm cloud. I had built my empire to escape her control, yet I had chained myself to her more tightly than ever. By the time her 65th birthday approached, I had been funding her lifestyle for years. 100,000 a month, millions over time, and still in her eyes I owed more. That entitlement set the stage for the night everything would break. By the time my mother's 65th birthday arrived, I was already exhausted from years of financial servitude. The $100,000 checks had become so routine that I barely noticed the transfer notifications anymore. I told myself I was paying for peace, but peace never came. When Helen announced she wanted a grand celebration at a luxury hotel in Houston, I agreed to cover everything, partly because I wanted to avoid another fight, partly because some stubborn part of me still hoped that if I gave her this, she might finally be satisfied. The ballroom glowed with chandeliers, the tables were set with crystal, and the wine flowed like water. Guests in gowns and tuxedos smiled as if we were royalty. But beneath the shimmer, my stomach churned. I had seen the way Peter whispered with Helen in the weeks leading up to the party, the sly glances, the too sweet smiles. Something was coming, and though I could not name it, I felt the dread sink deeper with every toast. Throughout the evening, Helen paraded me in front of guests like a trophy. "This is my daughter Monica," she said, her hand squeezing my shoulder with more force than pride. "She is the reason I can live this way. She is a good daughter." I smiled on cue, but inside I burned. The words were not praise, they were possession. When dessert was served, when the clinking of silverware softened into murmurs, Helen rose from her seat at the head table. She tapped her glass, silencing the room. With the microphone in her hand, she began to thank everyone for coming, weaving a performance of gratitude that glistened on the surface. Then, with a practiced smile, she delivered her line. "And tonight I have even more reason to celebrate," she announced, "because my daughter has promised to give me $1 million. Yes, 1 million so I can finally retire without worry. Isn't that wonderful?" For a moment, the words hung in the air, absurd, impossible. Then the guests erupted in applause. People clapped, cheered, raised glasses, congratulating her as if she had won a prize. My brother Peter let out a whistle, grinning like a man who had just secured his future. I froze. My chest constricted. My throat tightened, and I could hear my pulse louder than the applause. I had promised no such thing. I had not even been asked. Helen had decided to announce it publicly to trap me in a corner where refusal would mean humiliation. My mind raced as the guests turned their eyes toward me, waiting for the daughter's nod. The gracious smile, the confirmation of this generosity. Helen looked at me too, her eyes sharp beneath the mask of joy, daring me to contradict her. In that moment, I understood the plan. This was never about a birthday party. It was about power. She wanted to bind me to her with the weight of an audience to force me to pay her ransom under the gaze of people who would call me selfish if I refused. The applause felt like chains. Every clap pressed heavier against my ribs. My palms dampened, my knees trembled, but somewhere deep inside, something stronger stirred. I had lived my entire life under her control, but I could not nod this time. I could not allow her to dictate the rest of my life with one lie spoken into a microphone. Slowly, I rose from my chair. The applause faltered. Dozens of eyes followed me as I walked to the stage, each step echoing like a drumbeat. I took the microphone from her hands. My voice was low but steady. "That is not true," I said. The room fell silent. "I never promised $1,000,000. I already give more than any daughter should be asked. This lie ends tonight." Gasps rippled across the tables. Helen's smile froze, then cracked. And in her eyes I saw it, the fury that had simmered beneath every demand, every manipulation finally rising to the surface, ready to explode. The silence after my words was thick enough to choke on. For a long moment, no one moved, no one spoke, as if the entire ballroom had frozen between applause and disbelief. Helen's face stiffened, the corners of her lips twitching as she struggled to maintain the mask of elegance. Then she laughed, sharp and brittle. "Oh, Monica, always the joker," she said into the microphone, her eyes boring into me. "She likes to tease her poor mother. Of course she promised. She knows family comes first." She tried to turn it into a performance, a joke to smooth over the tension, but the crack in her voice betrayed her. I held the microphone firmly, my own pulse hammering in my ears. "I am not joking," I said louder this time, letting the words carry to every corner of the ballroom. "I never agreed to give $1,000,000. I already give $100,000 every month. That is the truth, and I will not stand here and let you lie about me." A collective gasp rose from the crowd. Some guests exchanged uneasy glances, others raised phones higher to record. The air shifted. What had been a celebration now smelled like scandal. Helen's eyes darkened, her cheeks flushing crimson beneath the powder. She yanked the microphone back from my hands with surprising strength. "Do not embarrass me in front of everyone!" She hissed, her voice vibrating with rage. "Do not you dare humiliate your own mother!" My brother Peter jumped to his feet, clapping his hands together mockingly. "Come on, Monica," he said with a crooked grin. "You have more money than you know what to do with. What's 1,000,000 to you? Don't be so stingy." His words ignited a murmur of agreement among some of the guests, people too polite or too cowardly to challenge the narrative. My stomach twisted as I saw them nodding along, complicit in my mother's manipulation. Helen seized the moment, raising her voice to the crowd. "You see," she cried, tears springing to her eyes on command. "I sacrificed everything for her, and now she wants to deny me the comfort I deserve. What kind of daughter refuses her own mother in front of family?" The room stirred sympathy, leaning her way. It was a trap inside a trap. If I yielded now, I would be enslaved forever, my boundaries obliterated. If I resisted, I would be branded ungrateful, cruel, selfish. My hands trembled, but I forced myself to speak again, my voice cutting through the noise. What kind of mother lies to extort her child? What kind of mother takes and takes until her daughter bleeds? The words shocked even me as they left my mouth sharper than I had ever dared to speak before. Gasps rippled again. Cameras zoomed closer. The performance of victimhood drained from Helen's face, replaced by raw fury. For the first time that evening, the mask fell away completely. Her voice dropped low, meant only for me, but caught by the microphone. "If you want war, you will have it." She slammed the microphone onto the table, the sharp sound echoing like a gunshot. The ballroom erupted in whispers, guests pulling out their phones, recording every moment. Peter leaned close to her, whispering something that twisted her expression even darker. I could not hear the words, but I saw the spark in her eyes ignite into flame. She straightened her spine, glaring at me with pure hatred. The confrontation had left the stage of words. Something uglier was coming, and I could feel it crawling toward me across the polished marble floor. The ballroom air grew heavier with every second, as if the chandeliers themselves were pressing down on us, daring me to break. Helen's breathing was ragged, her chest heaving beneath the sequined dress she had chosen to impress her audience. I saw the moment when the performance ended and the predator emerged. Without another word, she reached across the table and seized the crystal vase that had been filled with roses. The stems toppled to the tablecloth water, spilling in a dark stain, and before I could step back, she swung. The vase slammed against the side of my head with a force that split the air. Pain exploded white and blinding as shards of crystal shattered across the floor. My knees buckled. I felt hot blood spill down my temple, dripping onto my dress, staining the silk deep red. Screams pierced the ballroom. Someone dropped a glass. Chairs scraped against marble as guests stumbled backward, but no one came forward. They only watched frozen, their phones raised their screens glowing with the sick hunger of witnesses capturing scandal. Helen lifted the jagged base of the broken vase again, her eyes blazing with something feral. "You will not shame me!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You owe me everything!" I staggered, clutching at the table for balance, my vision doubling, the room tilting like a ship in a storm. My brother Peter stepped closer, not to help, but to block others from intervening. "Stay out of it," he barked at the few cousins who dared to step forward. "She deserves this lesson." His grin was twisted, his eyes shining with a sick satisfaction. Betrayal roared louder than the pain. The man who shared my blood, the boy I had once shielded from bullies, now stood cheering while our mother tried to break me in half. Helen lunged again, raking the jagged crystal against my arm. I cried out, the sound raw, torn from my chest. Guests gasped, but still they hesitated as if afraid of taking sides. Phones stayed raised, recording immortalizing my humiliation while doing nothing to stop it. In that chaos, time fractured. I heard the rush of my pulse louder than the screams, felt. The floor sway beneath me tasted iron in my mouth. I saw Peter's smirk, Helen's wild eyes, the cowardice in every face around me. My knees gave way. I collapsed onto the marble, my palms sliding through the pool of my own blood. Helen stood over me panting, clutching the jagged vase like a weapon, her shadow falling across my body. Ungrateful, she spat, her voice a rasp. "You think your money makes you better than me? I made you. I can unmake you." The words cut deeper than glass. For a heartbeat, I thought she might actually finish what she started, that my story would end in this ballroom with strangers watching through phone screens. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, someone having finally called for help. The sound sliced through the madness, a promise that this scene was not contained, that soon uniforms and authority would arrive. Helen froze, the weapon still in her hand, her chest rising and falling. Around us, whispers grew louder. The guests who had hesitated were finally realizing they had witnessed a crime, not a family squabble. But for me, lying on the floor, blood pooling, the damage had already been done. My body throbbed, but worse was the hollow ache in my chest. My own mother had tried to destroy me, and my own brother had ensured no one stopped her. That knowledge seared deeper than any wound. As paramedics burst into the room, shoving through the crowd, I let my eyes close, not from surrender, but from resolve. If this was the price of saying no, then so be it. But I would not let this be the end. I would rise, and I would make them pay for every drop of blood spilled tonight. When I woke, the sterile hum of fluorescent lights replaced the chaos of the ballroom. The air smelled of antiseptic, sharp and unforgiving. My head throbbed with every heartbeat, a bandage wrapped tight around my skull, and my arm burned beneath layers of gauze. Tubes and wires tethered me to machines that beeped in steady rhythm, proof that I was still alive. For a moment, I wished I could forget, that I could convince myself it had been a nightmare, but the ache in my bones reminded me my own mother had struck me down. My throat was dry when I asked the nurse what time it was. "You've been out since last night," she said gently. "The police have been by, but your mother and brother are telling their side already." Her words dropped like stones. I reached for my phone on the side table, my hand shaking. The screen lit up with notifications, hundreds of messages, missed calls, alerts from social media. My name was everywhere. Videos of the attack had gone viral. Headlines screamed, "Wealthy daughter attacks," "Her elderly mother," "Family feud," "Erupts at birthday party, greedy child refuses to support widow." My stomach turned as I scrolled. In clip after clip, Helen wept theatrically for the cameras clutching her arm as if she were the injured one, while Peter nodded solemnly, telling reporters I had lost control. They had twisted everything, turning me into the monster. The betrayal was suffocating, yet even through the fog of pain, I realized something else. Dozens of live streams told the truth. In the raw, uncut videos, my mother's rage was undeniable, her voice shrieking, her hand swinging the vase my brother standing guard. The evidence was there, scattered across the internet like shards of glass. The world had already seen it, even if the headlines tried to bury it. I sat back against the pillow, the IV tugging at my skin, and for the first time since the vase struck, I felt a flicker of power. They thought they had silenced me with blood and lies, but they had handed me something more dangerous than money proof. As I lay there, stitches pulling at my skin, memories of childhood echoed, Helen calling me selfish, Peter mocking me every moment I swallowed my pain to keep peace. That cycle ended now. I would not bleed in silence. I would not let them rewrite history with crocodile tears. I whispered it aloud, my voice hoarse but steady. This is not the end. This is the beginning. My nurse glanced at me puzzled, but I kept my gaze fixed on the ceiling. In that moment, clarity washed over me. My mother had raised me to believe family loyalty meant surrender, but she had forgotten the lesson I had learned building my empire: evidence, leverage, and timing win wars. I had them all now. I pictured Helen and Peter watching their screens, smug with victory, believing I was broken. They did not see the storm gathering inside me, did not hear the vow forming in my chest. I would rise from this hospital bed stronger than before. I would gather the evidence, call the lawyers, turn their lies into their undoing. They thought they had left me helpless, but they had only lit the fire of my revenge. And when it burned, it would consume everything they held dear. I called the lawyer before the swelling in my face had fully gone down because there was no time to waste. Evidence either works for you or against you, and every second they had to spin the narrative was another second they could poison witnesses and rewrite the story. My attorney, a woman named Claire Donovan, who specialized in high-stakes family and civil litigation, arrived at the hospital with a folder of experience and a calm that felt like armor. She watched the clips I handed her, the uncut live streams from 3 different angles, the shaky hands of a cousin, the hotel security camera that had captured Helen picking up the vase, Peter stepping in front of people, the sound of my head hitting marble. She did not flinch. She said 2 words that steadied me more than any morphine drip we can win. The plan unfolded with deliberateness, a sequence of moves that turned my moment of victimhood into leverage. First, we secured a restraining order to keep Helen away from me, my home, and my business premises. The judge read the police report, watched the raw footage on his bench, and issued the order within hours. That legal paper felt small and fragile in my hand, but it was a line drawn in the sand. Next, Claire helped me file an official complaint and an assault charge, positioning the case not as a, she said family dispute, but as an unambiguous criminal act recorded and witnessed by dozens. The police could no longer treat it as a private affair. The DA assigned a detective who took statements from guests, subpoenaed the hotel security footage, and texted me directly to say they had probable cause to bring charges. While the legal wheels turned, we attacked the battle for public opinion because Helen had been using sentiment to weaponize the sympathy of strangers. I hired a discreet PR firm and we mapped a strategy that would not sensationalize my pain, but would show the truth, as the truth was the unedited clips, the medical reports, the timeline, the witnesses. We launched a short campaign targeted at regional outlets and social platforms, boosting uncut footage with clear captions, assault evidence, witness statements. We asked reporters to focus on facts, not theatrics, to publish the hotel surveillance stills alongside the clips the family was using to spin their lie. The hashtag #HackJustice for Monica gained traction because people could see the raw footage and judge for themselves. The same phones that had recorded my fall now reflected a different verdict. Friends and colleagues began posting character references not to gloat over my suffering, but to attest to a pattern of manipulation that many of them had observed behind closed doors. Investors who had once envied Helen for her access to me quietly reached out. They had been watching the story and they told me they were concerned about reputational risk tied to anyone who publicly defended a violent act. That quiet pressure mattered. Meanwhile, Claire moved on the civil front, filing emergency motions to freeze any accounts into which Helen had been siphoning funds from my trust and to compel a forensic audit of transfers my mother allegedly controlled. She subpoenaed bank records and traced the flow of money that had been routed through Peter to pay for cars loans and investments. The paper trail made the case cleaner than most tabloids could invent. Helen had engineered dependency, and Peter had profited. Public perception shifted from a murmur of sympathy for an elderly widow to moral outrage at a pattern of financial exploitation. As phone calls flooded in from former family friends, some offered testimony, some offered documents, screenshots of texts requesting cash emails from Helen complaining she had no money, while a monthly transfer left my account in red for days. That accumulation of witness and documentary evidence made it impossible for local media to accept the poor mother narrative at face value. We organized a press conference at my lawyer's office where Claire and I presented the evidence in a straightforward, unemotional way. Here is the footage, here are the bank records, here are the sworn statements. We did not perform, we presented. The contrast between the theatrical sobbing Helen performed on social media and our calm, evidenced presentation was stark. Within 72 hours of the conference, the story had moved from local gossip to a front-page issue about elder exploitation, family violence, and the weaponization of kinship. Sponsors who had planned to appear at Helen's social clubs withdrew invitations. Peter was suspended from the charity board he'd joined under Helen's introductions. The hotel released a statement confirming it had given over security footage to law enforcement. The DA announced that charges were under review and the judge extended the protective order as a preliminary matter to ensure safety. In the weeks that followed, depositions painted a fuller picture: neighbors who had heard Helen berate me for years, the cousin who admitted she had been pressured to post supportive comments on Helen's feed, the caterer who had seen Helen whisper instructions to Peter before the speech. Each testimony tightened the noose. We pursued civil remedies concurrently, and the judge assigned to the temporary freeze on funds allowed an emergency guardian to audit Helen's spending, revealing that large sums had been moved into shell accounts benefiting Peter's ventures. The legal blow was precise. The audit report became the basis for an extortion suit. The assault charge gained public weight, and the combination left Helen with criminal exposure and financial unraveling. As the pressure mounted, cracks appeared in their armor. Peter's wife left him publicly citing the humiliation and the moral failure of standing by while a woman was assaulted. Friends who once rallied around Helen went silent. Her social life collapsed. She reached for sympathy and found doors closed. In depositions, she tried to recast her actions as a misunderstood moment of rage, but the footage spoke louder than her words. When the criminal charges were filed, the judge noted the volume of unedited evidence and set a trial date. This was the twist I had planned for in the quiet hours between morphine and sleep. What they had used as leverage, their ability to manipulate perception, had become their undoing because it was recorded, broadcast, and scrutinized. Their tools of gaslighting turned into the very proof that stripped them of credibility. I watched it all unfold, not from the vantage of vindictiveness, but with the hard focus of someone reclaiming what was stolen: my reputation, my safety, my autonomy. Each legal victory was a step toward healing because it affirmed the truth. The nights were still long, and the scars took time to fade, but with every sworn statement and every frozen account, the architecture of control Helen had built around our family crumbled. I had paid for peace for years, but I would not spend the rest of my life buying my safety back. The revenge was methodical, lawful, and public, and it was already beginning to change everything. The trial began on a gray Monday morning, the courthouse steps swarming with cameras and reporters shouting questions. For years, I had entered boardrooms and auditoriums with confidence, but walking into that building felt heavier than any IPO or investor pitch. This was not business. This was survival. Helen arrived flanked by Peter, her posture rigid, her hair sculpted into its usual helmet of perfection, but her eyes darted nervously at the crowd. The cheers and applause she had once courted had curdled into shouts of abuser and fraud. Protesters held signs outside the courthouse, not for me, not against me, but against the idea that family violence could be excused. Their presence reminded me that my story had become larger than us, a mirror held up to countless others who had been told to suffer in silence. Inside the courtroom, the prosecution wasted no time. They played the uncut footage from the birthday party, the crystal vase arcing through the air, the sound of impact, my collapse onto the marble. Gasps rippled even through the jury, though they had likely seen clips in the media. The silence afterward was not disbelief, but recognition. This was not rumor, not performance, but violence caught in real time. Witness after witness testified. Cousins admitted under oath that Helen had pressured them to defend her online. The hotel staff described Peter's commands to block anyone from stepping in. The forensic accountant presented a trail of funds siphoned from my accounts to support Peter's string of failures. Each testimony was another stone stacked on their shoulders. Helen's defense faltered quickly. Her lawyers tried to paint me as an unstable, greedy woman, lashing out at a frail mother, but the footage undercut every word. They argued the blow had been accidental, but the slow-motion replay made it clear her arm lifted her face, twisted her aim, deliberate. They tried to diminish the financial exploitation, but the bank records were irrefutable. What once had been gaslighting words against my memory was now documented fact. The verdict came after 3 days of deliberation. Helen was convicted of aggravated assault and financial exploitation. Peter was convicted of aiding and abetting, and civil judgments tied him to the fraudulent transfers. As the judge read the decision, Helen sat stone-faced, but Peter crumbled his shoulders, sagging, his eyes hollow. The sentences were not lengthy by Hollywood standards: probation, restitution, community service. But the reputational collapse was a harsher punishment than any cell. Helen lost her social standing, expelled from the clubs she once ruled. Peter filed for bankruptcy within months, his name poisoned in every business circle he once begged for credit. For me, the victory was not measured in their downfall alone, but in the reclamation of my own narrative. The world no longer whispered selfish daughter. They said survivor, fighter, truth teller. Women I had never met wrote to me sharing stories of mothers, fathers, siblings who had stolen from them, shamed them, struck them all under the guise of family duty. My inbox became a chorus of voices breaking silence. Still, revenge is never as clean as a movie reel. There were nights I lay awake replaying the blow, hearing the shatter, tasting the blood. Justice does not erase scars, but it gave me something far more enduring than peace. It gave me back myself. I stopped writing checks to buy love. I stopped answering midnight calls that dripped guilt through the line. I built walls not of money, but of boundaries. For the first time, my wealth was mine, my success, mine, my freedom, mine. The downfall of Helen and Peter was spectacular in its own way, not because they were dragged into poverty, but because the illusions they built collapsed. They had believed money could bind me forever, that manipulation could silence me. In the end, it was the truth that bound them. Evidence. They could not twist witnesses, they could not bully a world, they could not gaslight. That was the real revenge, not my suffering, but their inability to control the story anymore. When I walked out of the courthouse after the verdict, the cameras flashed and the reporters shouted questions again. But this time, I held my head high, not with arrogance, but with clarity. I said only one sentence into the microphones: family does not mean ownership. It means respect. The crowd erupted in applause, and for the first time in decades, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. The months after the verdict were not a fairy tale. Healing never comes in straight lines, and wounds do not vanish simply because justice is pronounced. My body bore the reminders, thin pink scars tracing across my arm, a dull ache in my temple when storms rolled through. Nights were still restless. Sometimes I jolted awake, heart racing, hearing the phantom shatter of glass. But unlike before, I no longer woke to shame or silence. I woke to freedom. I poured myself into therapy, into rebuilding not just my company, but my sense of self. My therapist reminded me that for 42 years I had been conditioned to believe love required sacrifice, that duty meant erasure. Undoing that belief was as exhausting as any courtroom battle. Yet step by step, I learned to redefine family, not as blood that demanded, but as people who gave freely, who respected boundaries, who celebrated without strings attached. Friends became my chosen siblings. Colleagues who had stood by me became part of my circle. For the first time, I allowed myself to believe I was worthy of love that did not come with a price tag. Helen and Peter faded from my daily life. Their names surfaced occasionally in local gossip columns stripped of glamour tied now to probation hearings and restitution payments. But they no longer held power over me. That was the truest victory, not their downfall, but my detachment. Their shadows no longer stretched across my days. I made a choice then, not just to heal, but to speak. Too many messages had filled my inbox during the trial to ignore women in their 50s and 60s telling me they too had been drained by entitled children. Men who confessed that their parents had stolen inheritances and silenced them with guilt. Daughters who whispered that they had endured blows in silence because society told them family was untouchable. Their words carved a new mission into my path. So I began telling my story not just in court filings or news conferences, but on my own terms. I gave talks at community centers, appeared on podcasts about financial abuse, wrote essays under my own name. Each time I repeated the same message: family does not mean ownership. It means respect. That phrase became a mantra one people repeated back to me when I began to believe fully. The more I spoke, the lighter I felt. Shame shrank under the sunlight of honesty. Pain lost some of its grip when it became purpose. And every time a stranger came up to me afterward, tears in their eyes saying, "Your story gave me courage," I felt the cycle breaking, not just for me, but for them. Life slowly expanded beyond the trial. My company thrived again, not because I buried myself in work to escape, but because I led with clarity instead of fear. I traveled without guilt, bought art I loved without second guessing, sat by the ocean and allowed myself to rest. These were small acts, but they were radical for a woman who had once measured her worth only by what she gave away. On the anniversary of the trial's verdict, I stood before a packed auditorium at a conference on domestic and financial abuse. Cameras flashed, microphones gleamed, but I did not flinch. I told the story from the beginning, the demands, the gaslighting, the vase, the hospital vow, the courtroom, and then I told the ending. Not the ending of their downfall, but the ending that mattered: my survival, my healing, my choice to live without chains. I closed with words that had lived in me since that night on the marble floor. If you are listening and you are carrying wounds inflicted by those who were supposed to protect you, know this: you are not alone. You do not owe your silence to blood. You do not owe your freedom to guilt. You are allowed to draw a line. You are allowed to say no. And if anyone calls that betrayal, remember, sometimes betrayal is simply refusing to be destroyed. The applause that followed was thunderous, not because I was extraordinary, but because I had spoken aloud what so many had buried. That was my final act of revenge, not rage, not punishment, but truth spoken without fear. And as I walked off the stage, past the cameras, past the crowd, into the fresh air outside, I breathed deeply. For the first time in my life, the air tasted like mine.